Okay, let's unpack this. We are dropping straight into the deep end here, submerged in the perpetually nightmarish city of New Eden.
Right.
If you are looking for clarity and chaos, this is, I think, the deep dive for you. We've been handed excerpts from the case file for Detective Elias Crow's investigation into the philosopher killer.
And New Eden is really the perfect backdrop for this material. I mean, the sources describe it as the city of, glass towers right next to crumbling, rain-soaked tenements, a
Mhm.
place where wealth and corruption just meet utter despair. So our mission is to track the escalating, intensely personal patterns of this killer.
Yeah, a killer whose crimes are, it seems, less about violence and more about, what, teaching something?
E-
Pedagogy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our guide through this is Detective Elias Crow.
Right. He's 42, but frankly looks like he's lived 2 centuries. Brilliant, highly capable, but just fundamentally broken.
And it all goes back 5 years to his wife, Sarah. She was killed in a botched raid collateral damage.
And he's just coping the only way he knows how, right? By drowning himself in his work.
And this is the case that finally pushes him over the edge. It starts simply enough. A series of victims, all killed cleanly.
A single professional throat slitting. But the staging, that's what turns it into something else. Performance art.
Yes, everybody is left with a quote ripped from classical philosophy.
It's the ultimate intellectual insult, isn't it? Because these victims are, as the sources put it, nobodies. A librarian, a barista, an accountant.
Mm,
Yet the killer is treating them like they're these monuments to high-minded concepts. The core puzzle for Elias is, what's the connection between the victim and the philosophy?
is the killer mocking the victims, or
Or mocking Elias?
that's the question that really haunted the early days of the investigation. Let's look at the first three clues because they establish the intellectual trajectory.
Okay, so the first victim was the librarian, found way out in the warehouse district.
And the quote was Albert Camus.
In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer.
Camus is the philosopher of the absurd. And the source material, it notes that the police really struggled with this at first. Why this quote for a librarian?
It's about finding meaning in a meaningless world, right?
Right, so maybe the killer was pointing out the absurdity of this person's existence, or maybe they were challenging Elias to find his own strength.
And before they can even process that, the killer pivots violently. The second victim, a barista.
Hmm. And you can feel the confusion in the source material as the team realizes the intellectual landscape has just completely shifted.
So the barista was left with a quote from Immanuel Kant. Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made.
We've gone from existentialism to fundamental morality. I mean, Kant is rigid, structured, all about duty. The crooked timber line is his famous reflection on human imperfection.
It almost reads like a mission statement from the killer. Like they're operating in a city of crooked timber, and this is what, their justification?
Exactly. And the third victim sealed it. This was a deliberate, escalating curriculum. An accountant this time.
And the quote was Nietzsche. What is man? A bridge between the animal and the overman, a rope over an abyss.
So now we're into self-overcoming, achieving this overman status.
So we have Camus on absurdity, Kant on morality, Nietzsche on self-transcendence. The source material highlights that Detective Crow and his partner, Lena Vasquez, they initially just dismissed it as highbrow nonsense.
Yeah, they failed to see the dark personal thread connecting all of it. The victims were spaced out at first, methodical. The killer was enjoying the game.
But then we move into the second phase, what the files call the escalation of the game, and the pace just, it quickens dramatically.
There's an impatience now,
Uh,
or confidence.
and the shift is unmistakable. The philosophical clues, they start becoming physical acts of aggression. Victim 4 was a professor of ethics.
A huge departure from the nobody victims.
And this time, the quote wasn't on a piece of paper.
No, it was carved violently into his chest.
Hmm.
Plato's "The unexamined life is not worth living."
It's not a suggestion anymore. It's an accusation, targeting an ethics professor with a statement on self-examination that speaks volumes.
And the final victim in this series, before the big breakthrough, was a judge found in his own chambers.
With Aristotle, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit.
So the philosophical escalation is undeniable now.
Hmm.
It's this rigorous, lethal methodology. You have Camus for existence, Kant for rules, Nietzsche for aspiration, Plato for self-scrutiny.
Yeah, and Aristotle for action and consequence. This wasn't random. It felt like a critique of how Elias Crow was living. or, failing to live.
And that brings us to the critical turning point, the aha moment that cracks the case wide open for him.
And it is profoundly painful. He realizes the victims aren't the key, the geography is.
And that realization just shatters the entire framework of the investigation. He discovers that the location of each crime scene corresponds to a massive failure in his life, personal or professional.
The killer knew him intimately.
Let's just detail that list because it shows the depth of the torture. The librarian, victim 1.
Found near the site of the botched raid where his wife Sarah was killed, the very root of his trauma.
Unbelievable. Then the barista, found near the site of a human trafficking bust. One where Elias made a procedural error that let the ringleader walk free.
The crooked timber of humanity. It was about his failure.
Exactly. The accountant was near a badly handled robbery. And the ethics professor,
Near the venue where Elias gave a disastrous, drunken guest lecture right after Sarah's death.
highlighting his hypocrisy. And finally, the judge.
The Aristotle victim. He presided over that exact trafficking case that Elias flubbed.
So this whole thing, it wasn't a philosophy lecture. It was a deeply personal, customized indictment of Elias Crow. The killer wasn't speaking to the city.
No, they were speaking only to him, forcing him into this traumatic public self-examination, weaponizing his past.
The pressure on him becomes unbearable. And that brings us right into the final moments, the confrontation and the shocking revelation.
Elias gets an anonymous tip, a classic trap, leading him to an abandoned factory.
Hmm.
And inside, the killer has set up this final tableau. A mannequin, staged like the victims, with one last clue.
And this final quote, it crystallizes the whole game. It's Descartes.
I think, therefore I am. But what if thought deceives?
It's the perfect philosophical poison for a detective who is already questioning his own sanity.
So he wakes up, he's bound, and the killer steps out of the shadows, asks him, "Have you looked within?"
And you expect some faceless mastermind.
But the reveal is so much more devastating. The mask comes off. It's Detective Lina Vasquez,
His partner,
the person he'd been leaning on, who'd been investigating this with him step by step.
feeding his own confirmation bias,
Yeah.
participating in his breakdown. I mean, it's just the ultimate betrayal.
And her motive. It's a study in destructive, unrequited love.
She confesses immediately. She was in love with Elias, but he chose Sarah, and she admits. She was the one who murdered Sarah during that raid 5 years ago.
She made it look like an accident. So the source of his trauma was her all along.
My God.
So the 5 philosophical murders were just this elaborate, meticulous form of psychological warfare designed to break him down so that he would finally, agonizingly, turn to her.
She murdered Sarah, then forced Elias to face the consequences of Sarah's absence. It's twisted.
And her breakdown of the victims, it reveals the calculus behind it. She saw each one as a symbol of Elias's moral debt.
The librarian, for example.
Represented Elias's ignorance of Sarah's pain, him burying himself in books instead of facing his grief.
The barista and the accountant were what she called his mundane failures, the everyday compromises, the slip-up.
She is judging him on everything, the big things and the small things.
The professor was his hypocritical ethics. The judge was the failure of the system that he caused. She saw herself as the righteous consequence of his flawed life.
It's a completely self-justifying narrative. As she finishes her confession, she points a gun at him, quoting Kierkegaard.
Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards.
She gave him the understanding, and now she was going to deny him the future. But he has that flash of his old brilliance.
Right, he slips a hand free, uses his backup piece, and shoots her before she can fire. A violent, necessary, but deeply tragic end.
And her final words, as she's dying, they bring it all full circle. She looks at him and says, "Because the unexamined love is not worth having."
Tying it directly back to Plato.
Wow. So in the aftermath and lingering doubt, Elias is hailed as a hero. The philosopher-killer case is closed. But for Elias, it's hollow.
Because that Descartes quote, "What if thought deceives?" it becomes the lens through which he sees everything. The trauma was so immense, he starts to wonder.
Was Lina the only killer? Did his fractured mind just fabricate her whole confession to get some kind of closure?
It's the perfect end for a story set in New Eden. He caught the killer, but he can't trust the reality of the capture itself.
So, to synthesize this, we started with philosophical quotes targeting random people and followed them into the devastating personal breakdown of one detective. The entire case was an engineered psychological profile.
Motivated by a twisted, murderous, unrequited love, a game played with lethal intellect.
But of course, this is New Eden, and the sources leave us with one final chilling detail. Months later, after Alina is buried, another body turns up.
A fresh philosophical clue.
And the new clue reads, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow."
Wow.
And that raises our final provocative thought for you, the listener. If the source material confirms a new body appeared after Lena's death, was Elias's doubt justified? Did he fail to fully examine the darkness? Or is the philosopher killer less a person and more a title? A game that can be inherited in a city like New Eden.
What does it truly mean to bear almost anyhow when your why is rooted in such profound betrayal and trauma?
The examination, it seems, always continues.
Something to mull over as you navigate your own understanding of truth and justice.